Tēnā koutou katoa. This morning, I'm going to share with you the findings of the National State of Environment Report 2025. So it's referred to as Our Environment 2025. It's produced by the Ministry for the Environment and Stats New Zealand. And it's produced every 3 years, basically as a synthesis of the regular reporting that goes on under the individual environmental domains: air, atmosphere and climate, freshwater, land and marine. And it's based on the standard sort of model of drivers, pressure, state and impact, but it doesn't include responses, so it doesn't include recommendations around policy change. So I'll talk about the findings of this report along with its relevance to the Waikato region, along with our own regional state of environment report that was produced in 2022, and a little bit more discussion around emerging contaminants. So with regards to drivers and pressures, the report has identified that our economy is based on the primary sector and tourism, and along with a growing and ageing population, these are the drivers that are putting the most pressure on our environment. We import a high proportion of goods, and vehicle ownership and waste generation is amongst the highest per capita rates in the developed world. And we prefer standalone housing and private land, which drives expansion into rural areas. And climate change can amplify these drivers and pressures, including increasing tensions over water resources, disrupting our infrastructure, agriculture, tourism and food systems due to extreme weather events. And it also can result in population displacement due to coastal erosion and flooding. So if we compare these findings around drivers and pressures, we can see that our own regional drivers and pressures are very similar. So we have identified that an increasing population and urban development on rural land are putting the most pressures on our environmental domains. So starting with the first environmental domain in the state of that, which is land, the findings indicate that erosion has been exacerbated by poorly managed exotic forestry on steep slopes and higher intensity rainfalls. While livestock numbers have stabilised, there is more intensive farming continuing to expand, mostly in the Canterbury region. We're now seeing that the increasing trends in disposal rates to landfill have now stabilised, so that's some good news there. We are seeing some emerging, but limited at this stage, evidence of microplastics in New Zealand soils. And there is a high proportion of indigenous terrestrial species that remain threatened with extinction or at risk of becoming threatened. So significantly, the reptiles, terrestrial birds and mosses. Pests and weeds are also threatening biodiversity and putting vulnerable ecosystems at risk. And conversion of highly productive land for urban development has increased significantly. We're also seeing pressure on our green spaces in cities from densification and expansion, and specifically Auckland and Hamilton were singled out as cities where there is this pressure. And this increases our vulnerability to things like flooding, urban heating, so green space has been well shown to provide a cooling effect on urban centres. Air pollution, vegetation is good at absorbing air pollutants, so we have our air pollution is vulnerable to reducing green spaces. And we're also potentially going to result in some impacts on our well-being because the removal of green spaces reduces our connectivity with our environment. So if we compare these findings with our own regional findings, we identified in 2022 that there has been a significant conversion of forestry to pastoral land between 2001 to 2018, with a 17% increase in pastoral intensification over the same period. Erosion is still a problem, with forestry, agriculture and urban development contributing to sediment loads. And wetlands and forest are still under pressure, including clearance of indigenous shrub and scrubland, with peat drainage resulting in land subsidence and significant greenhouse gas emissions. So moving on to the freshwater domain, nationally with regards to the state of that domain, we're seeing that fecal pathogen contamination of groundwater remains the most widespread issue, but there is also a significant proportion of our groundwater that has accumulated excess nitrate. Well, groundwater, most of New Zealand continues to comply with the drinking water standards. There are some aquifers that are still not safe for drinking water that has not been treated for nitrate. And pesticides and the PFAS suite of contaminants that are often referred to as the forever chemicals have been monitored nationally in our groundwater. And while the results of this investigation have not identified any widespread issues for groundwater, and also that they rarely exceed drinking water standards. 45% of our river length and 10% of our lake sites are unsuitable for swimming, with 41% of river sites indicating a worsening trend for E. coli. In monitoring of Mohinga Kai, our cultural food gathering has identified pathogen contamination and a decline in the health and availability of Mohinga Kai species, such as kora, tuna, and puha. 55% of river length assessed as having moderate or severe organic pollution or nutrient enrichment. And 46% of our lakes are assessed as having poor or very poor health in terms of nutrient enrichment, with 45% of lake monitoring sites indicating a worsening ecosystem health trend. Land use and human activities have increased our erosion rates and contamination of freshwater and marine systems. And again, microplastics have popped up in urban streams across New Zealand. The remaining 10% of wetlands across New Zealand continue to be degraded and lost. And over 200 freshwater species have been introduced either deliberately or accidentally. And a good example of this is the gold clam, which has now infiltrated our own region. Poor water quality, low oxygen, and warm temperatures have increased botulism outbreaks that have killed hundreds of fish and birds. And we know that this is becoming an issue for our own Whangamarino wetland. Structures for diverting or controlling water have altered and fragmented river habitats, placing pressure on fish migration. And many indigenous species are now threatened with extinction or are at risk of becoming threatened. So if we look to the findings from our own regional state of environment report for the freshwater state, we see that nitrogen levels have continued to worsen in many water bodies. But the good news is that phosphorus discharges to rivers have decreased. So a good example of this is where we have point source reductions from places like Puketi Wastewater Treatment Plant. Wetlands continue to be subject to development pressure. Shallow lakes have deteriorated and are at risk, and ecosystem health of many of our water bodies does not meet national bottom lines. And despite extensive fencing and planting of stream banks, fecal bacteria in rivers and streams remain high. And our State of Environment report recommended we could get better outcomes around this by implementing this through farm plans. We also see displacement of native weed and fish by algae and invasive fish, which represents a loss of biodiversity and ecosystem health. Now moving to the marine state, the good news is we're seeing more water quality monitoring sites with improving trends than worsening trends. However, there is an increasing risk of harmful algal blooms due to excess nutrients from land. Most fish stocks have been fished within safe limits, but bycatch data is showing continued pressure on biodiversity and protected species. So we're still seeing things like dolphins being captured in nets. And again, microplastics have been found to be widespread and have been found in many of New Zealand's fish species, including green-lipped mussels. Sea level rise projections indicate that areas experiencing ongoing downward land movement may face faster relative rise than previously reported. And if we look at this map on the left here, we can see those darker blue areas, areas where land movement has been moving downwards, particularly in the southern end of the North Island, and even in the west coast of our own region, we're seeing some areas of downwards land movement, which is just going to exacerbate some of these sea level rise projection effects. More than half of our indigenous marine invertebrate species remain threatened with extinction or are at risk of becoming threatened, with an increase in invasive species exacerbating this risk. And if we look to the findings of our own State of Environment report for the marine environment, we see that our estuaries are under pressure from eroded sediment and increasing nutrient inputs, that the management of diffuse nitrogen sources from the land to the Firth of Thames will be important to limit algae blooms and low oxygen, and that we need better pathways to and from the sea to improve the ecological health and habitat access for fish. But we can see some good improvements in this area through ICM's prioritisation project for introducing fish-friendly pump station design. Moving on to the air state, nationally air quality is improving, but pollutant levels in some areas could pose risks to human health, with many sites across New Zealand still exceeding World Health Organization guidelines. And it's important to note that the World Health Organization recognises air pollution as the single biggest environmental risk to human health. Air pollution emissions are reducing, but transport and home heating still are the main contributors. Home heating using wood burners is a major source of fine particulate, PM2.5, but this source continues to decline in favour of heat pumps and electric heaters. So we are slowly progressing towards cleaner heating sources for our homes. Transport emissions continue to reduce due to improvements in engine technology and fuel quality, despite a growing fleet and increased vehicles kilometres travelled per year. Road vehicles are our largest source of nitrogen dioxide, particularly from diesel-powered vehicles, which are also a significant contributor to fine particulate PM2.5. Now, airborne particulate matter is also generated from natural sources and is influenced by climate. So areas with drier conditions and more frequent drought are projected to experience worsening air quality due to lower rainfall, higher wildfire risks, and more wind-blown dust. And it's interesting that a recent US study has found that smoke from climate-fueled fires, such as wildfire in the US, has contributed to over 15,000 additional deaths over the last 15 years. This is in addition to the normal deaths that you would expect from exposure to air pollutants. Artificial light at night is brighter and more widespread, with evidence that it affects some native species such as bats, weta, and seabirds. And we're also now seeing evidence of lighting impacts on trees. So this image here is an example from Victoria Street in Hamilton, where you can see a deciduous tree right across from a very well lit billboard, and we can see that the natural loss of leaves during autumn on one of those branches closest to the most well lit billboard are taking longer to fall off. If we compare to the findings of our own State of Environment report for air quality is improving in most towns, but is sometimes poor in winter in locations like Tokoroa, where wood burners are the main contributor for winter PM10. Population growth is also, particularly in Hamilton and Waikato district, likely to potentially worsen air quality from increased traffic emissions along key traffic routes. So if we now move on to the findings for the atmosphere and climate state nationally, we can see here the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide as measured at Burring Head, Wellington, which has been operating since 1972, and we see the increasing CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. Our global contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is small, but is high on a per person basis. We are seeing some good news now that net greenhouse gas emissions projecting to continue decreasing. So we saw some increases up to about 2005. This plateaued out for a while, and we're now seeing in recent years some improvements in the greenhouse gas emissions. So we're expecting long-term temperatures rising with fewer frost days and longer growing seasons. And also marine heat waves have become more frequent, intense, and long-lasting. And in fact, a recent study in New Zealand, led by New Zealand climate scientists, has identified that the ocean near New Zealand is warming up faster than anywhere else. And this effect is not just making our seas warmer, but it's worsening storms like ex-tropical Tam, which created recent havoc for us. Climate change is affecting our land, freshwater and marine habitats and species which are already under pressure from other human activities. And if we compare with the findings from our own state of environment report findings, we identified that increased water security is the most significant issue for us based on long-term trends of reducing rainfall and increasing water demand, which will be exacerbated by climate change and an increased population growth and development. Now, the report, National State of Environment report, then looks at impacts on people, society and our economy. Our food, water and air are impacted by the state of environment and climate change. And this is impacting our access to good quality food, which is at risk from global disruptions and extreme weather events. Contaminated water used for recreational purposes, food gathering and drinking can lead to disease and illness. And breathing air pollution can cause serious health issues to thousands per year. Up to 3,000 deaths have been assigned to air pollution per year in New Zealand. And it's also contributing to very high social costs of up to $15.6 billion. The impact on our culture and identity and connections to place and ties of nature is also of significance. And we're also seeing impacts on our homes, infrastructure and livelihoods. And despite this, we continue to build and live in at-risk places and areas. So if we compare with the impacts on people, society and economy under our own state of environment for the 2022 regional report, we see that our wellbeing index has followed a flatter trajectory than GDP, indicating a lack of progress in people's quality of life despite economic growth in our region. Now, some of the knowledge gaps identified through the SOE report were that we need a better understanding of the relationships between drivers and environmental pressures and interactions between different environmental domains, as well as how environmental change affects our quality of life. We need more research and data on emerging contaminants, and we need to get smarter in the way we collect and use data. We need to use Maori knowledge to enhance our understanding and management of the environment. Now, I wanted to finish off by just talking a little bit about emerging contaminants. As the State of Environment report indicated, microplastics have been identified in all environmental domains. Stormwater, wastewater treatment plants, industrial sites and recreational use have been identified as significant sources. Now, Councillor Nicol has recently discussed and raised questions with us regarding emerging contaminants and microplastics. So I thought it'd be opportune to just slot in a little bit more information around some of the findings of emerging contaminants. So a recent study which investigated microplastics in urban streams in 5 regions across New Zealand, including 52 streams, found microplastics in every single stream in that investigation. The investigation didn't find any statistically significant difference between the 5 regions investigated. However, it was interesting to note that one of the streams, the Tuhi Karamea stream just southwest of Hamilton, was identified as being the most polluted with regards microplastic concentrations. The University of Canterbury study has recently identified microplastics in organic waste such as biosolids and composts, including the so-called biodegradable plastics. And vehicle tyre and road paint also contribute to microplastics, including the vehicle tyre additive 6-ppd quinone, which is highly toxic to aquatic species. So this emerging contaminant 6-ppd quinone is used to prolong the longevity of tyres, which is a good thing, but on the downside, it is also highly toxic, especially to fish. Now, Plastics are, we're seeing continued and increased monitoring in different domains. One of the problems is there are no existing health guidelines or standards for microplastics to compare against. The effects are very variable and complex due to the types of plastic, the plasticizers added to these plastics, and the fact that these plastic microparticles act as substrates for absorbing other contaminants makes it quite difficult to set guidelines and standards. Concern is often raised about the impact of sunscreen additives on sea coral, particularly benzophenone, titanium dioxide and zinc oxide nanoparticles, which are also found in a lot of particles that are shed from tyre and brake wear, road marking paints and other microplastic sources. So while sunscreen additives will have an impact on sea coral, some of these other sources are probably likely to be more significant. Now, the suite of compounds, PFAS, are referred to as the forever chemicals. While they were not found to be widespread in New Zealand groundwater and are really occurring above drinking water standards, they have been identified recently in New Zealand biosolids, and we do need further research around this to understand the range and variability to better understand the risks, particularly because with the proposed wastewater standards under the RMA reform that's going on at the moment, there is a proposal to biosolids should be allowed to be applied to land as a permitted activity. And so we need some better information around some of the emerging contaminants that have been identified in biosolids to sort of provide us better guidance on how implementing biosolids to land would play out in the environment and impact the environment. While pesticides were also not identified as being of concern in groundwater in New Zealand, there is growing concern about the declining levels of bees that are a result of the neonicotinoid group of insecticides. This was definitely an issue that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment identified in his recent report, Knowing What's Out There, Regulating the Environmental Fate of Chemicals. So the PCE has identified that there is no central reporting of volumes of chemicals sold or used in New Zealand. And addressing the gap around our knowledge of emerging contaminants requires central government action in response to the PCE's recommendations on chemical management in New Zealand. If we could have these recommendations implemented by central government, this would really help provide regional councils with the necessary tools for targeted monitoring and assessment of emerging contaminants. So in summary, with regards to the findings of the National State of Environment report, we see increasing pressures from a growing and aging population on our environment, continuing to result in degradation as a result of the way we choose to live. Agriculture, forestry and urban expansion is contributing to the continuing deterioration of surface water and groundwater. Urban expansion and poor urban development are reducing our highly productive land and green space. And there is increasing risk of harmful algal blooms in coastal regions, with more invasive species posing increased risk to our native marine species. Many of our indigenous species from all domains continue to be threatened with extinction or are at risk of becoming threatened, resulting in a loss of biodiversity and reduced ecosystem health. Air quality is improving, but still poses a risk to human health, with home heating and transport our most significant sources of poor air quality. Our global contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is small but high on a per person basis, but net emissions are projected to continue decreasing. Warmer temperatures, changes in rainfall patterns, and increasing frequency of extreme weather events is affecting our environment. There is projected to be faster relative sea level rise in some areas of New Zealand, but we still build in at-risk areas. These are all issues that are equally relevant to the Waikato region. We certainly still have some challenges ahead of us. Thank you.
Kia ora, Jonathan. I should have had you up first so that everything after that would have given us some good feelings, maybe. This is very intense, and thank you for all of that. Amongst all of this, me personally have seen all the not so good things that are happening, but somewhere for our mokos, we have to look at what is the solutions or the mitigation that we in this generation can at least start putting together to ensure that our next two generations won't be as highly impacted as we are today. So looking at this paper, I see all of the unfortunate stuff happening, but I don't actually see a solution or any mitigation in that somewhere. Whether it starts at home, like most things, I don't see anything in here. So in saying that, I will move the questions around the table, but thanks for your presentation. And it is a worry, and the biggest worry for us in this rōpū is that mitigation of the next two generations to ensure that our next two generations aren't going to be as impacted as today. And how do we do that? Who's first? Jen.
Go with Bruce if you like, member.
I'm the first. You only two got your lights on at the moment, so either one.
Thanks.
Oh, well, yeah. Thanks for a depressing start.
Yeah.
None of this is new. This is our biggest problem. None of this is new. This is a trend that's been going on for a very long time, and we have to look at ourselves and ask the question, what are we doing about it? You know, we can produce state of the environment reports till the cows come home. That wasn't a pun, by the way, because at the end of the day, reporting on the demise of our environment and our livelihood is just not good enough. It's just not good enough. This report needs to go to the full council. This is, you know, to me, this is part of our issue. The most important report probably that we will have received in our triennium is the one we've just heard today, because that is the one that should be shaping our structure and the way we respond to how we're going to fix the problem. And it's sort of tucked away in the smallest of all of our committees. And the question is, will any of the other councillors, apart from, I see there's a couple online, will they even know that this report was presented to this committee? So that's my first recommendation from today. This is something that needs to be addressed by the whole council in the appropriate place. I have to say too that, you know, just reiterating this issue about this is not new, is like all of the drivers that have caused these issues are still evident on the landscape and are still being promoted in many parts of the way we operate. So we have a dichotomy within the council in relation to the things that we're trying to do to improve our economy and our productivity and all of those things. But unfortunately, the downside of that is those are all contributing to the drivers that lead to the problem that's just been outlined. So we haven't found the appropriate balance yet. We haven't got to anywhere near the appropriate balance. And the scale at which we would need to respond, we are way short of the scale of the response that we would need to make a difference in many of these areas. So, and of course, we should be looking very carefully at what our actual responsibilities are in the RMA, because all of these things are actually addressed in the RMA and they require us to behave in a particular way. And largely, in many cases, we've been ignoring them or not reacting at the magnitude and scale required to reverse the driver. So we need to ask ourselves, what happens if we are the subject of a court case like the one that Ngāi Tahu has recently taken up against Canterbury, Environment Canterbury? How would we fare in this? I think we'd do better than them, but the point I'm making is that we are still overseeing a continuing decline in too many areas. So not wanting to sound too gloomy though, the question we have to confront too is what are the bits of this equation that we have the most direct responsibility for? So what I mean by that is the RMI in relation to our responsibilities is largely focused on aspects of private land and what we need to do to assist landowners. And I mean that not to penalise or harass them, but to assist landowners to do the right things. And that's why I take a lot of heart from the progress we've made in our triennium in relation to the Natural Heritage Fund, for example. That is one good place where we can look and see what response you can get when you encourage people to do the right thing. So I'm just really saying, first of all, we need to scale up our response to reverse the trends that have been outlined. And we need to think about new ways to address some of these issues in the new triennium. And I would also say that the current structure that we have and the emphases that we place on various of the aspects of our responsibilities are part of the problem of the drivers here. We need to really think ourselves more carefully about how we should be structured as a council to address these problems, to really get the best out of what resource we have, which is limited, we know. But are we really doing the best job to address those drivers of decline? That's my fundamental question. And perhaps the start of that discussion might be, first step, bring this report, please, to the full council. It shouldn't be just tucked away in the Environmental Performance Committee. Thank you.
So I guess, guys, what Bruce has just done is reiterated what I said earlier, and that'll be a good next step. You know, I don't expect you guys to write the Bible on how to fix it, but at least have something, you know, that we at least could look at, and I will look at how do we include this into the next council meeting, whether it's next. It probably won't be till next month's one. So I would really like to have a good look at some, I guess, mitigations around where we as councillors can talk to our people or something, you know, easy stuff. We have workshops about everything. What we're not doing, though, is talking to our people about how much damage they are doing to the environment. Not all of us, but some of us, okay?
Oh, you go first.
Okay. I completely agree with both of those comments. I mean, this is all stuff that, nothing in there was actually surprising as such. A lot of it I knew even before being elected 5-6 years ago.
Can you bring this closer?
Yeah. And I think what it gets down to is, I mean, people still refer to us as Environment Waikato, like when I notice out and about. And there's an expectation from our constituents around those vital things, the food, water, air quality, the waste work that was in a previous paper today, that we do that well. That's the impression I get from a lot of people talking to them. And I agree that it's something that doesn't get enough attention in our council. And funnily enough, like even going around to the districts and talking about climate work, which can be very polarizing at times, this stuff isn't. And that's just why I think there's such an opportunity to do work in this space more proactively. I absolutely am frustrated by the fact that central government, with all its tax dollars and power, and is so much better placed to address a whole lot of this stuff. But I struggle with just sitting back and waiting for them to one day do it, because I've been watching for a long time and they're not. And so I'm really supportive of this going to full council and perhaps having some options of some high, medium and low ambition, or whatever it might be, or the options we have around, you know, emerging contaminants. I'm aware that we can ask in consents for that to be monitored, just to provide some data over time, or that we can get students to do some research, or that we can do our own research. So that's a really good start. Thank you, Bruce. Because I don't think the solution necessarily lies in policy. We've seen how long PC1 is taking. I think it lies in the type of proactive work, like what Valerie does in the waste space, and us working with the TA. We're keen to see some options of that in there. And yeah, I notice always that the point comes up about not having the exact toxicity data, especially when it comes to emerging contaminants. But we know, it says quite clearly in the report from ours and theirs, that it will harm, but I don't need to wait to see exactly how much it will harm for us to start spending some resource, figuring out where and when we should do some things differently. So next triennium, I would love to see this council focus on an ecosystem health type of roadmap, kind of like the climate roadmap, but just shifting more to the human health aspect and the ecosystem health aspect, because I think we've done some great work in the climate space. But the messages that I've gotten from the TAs and constituents is that they want to talk about this stuff, more so even than the emissions, which is like one bullet point out of 10 of those. Yeah, so that's one big point. The microplastic piece, really interesting to have come through. Really interesting that some of the Hamilton rivers are in the top 10 of the country for that being an issue. That is something I'm really keen to explore with Hamilton City councillors and Hamilton City to see what, because we often focus on the rural space, and actually it's time to focus a bit more on the urban space for some of these contaminants. So I want to know why those streams have got those microplastics in them at such a high level. That would be really useful, and I think Hamilton City Council can help with that. I think they should know why as well, and then we can worry about whether that's toxic or not down the track. But why? Why not Auckland? Why not Wellington? And then with the PFAS as well, microplastics and PFAS, I want to know why. No, where in the Waikato is it an issue? Like, what worries me really is both of those things spreading through municipal biosolids onto land. We want to produce food. We're doing some spatial planning. Just understanding where that stuff is getting spread around will be really useful, since we've got urban encroaching on highly productive soils, and then we're contaminating them somewhere. We don't know where. It seems like a piece of work that we could do. And so I'm just putting that out there. That's one I would like to see. And the insects one, in particular in relation to bees, curious in that space, because you hear about it being a massive problem, especially overseas. I can't get the scale of whether it is massive here or not from this, but it just seems that being the food basket of New Zealand in the Waikato, and bees being so critical to horticulture and everything, that we should provide some more data if central government won't, through whatever they fund or don't fund. Probably talked long enough for not even being a member of this committee, but there you go. That gives a bit of content should it come back to full council at some stage. And hopefully in a time frame that it can influence the existing councillors and then eventually the future council for their strategic direction setting, because I agree this is a core focus that should be part of that consideration.
So, Jen, are you looking at forming a type of motion or recommendation or something? No, not you, but to us, and then some of us will go away and look at it, and maybe you should just write.
I'll have to
something
think while Robbie's talking.
Vision and
Thank you.
yeah. Robbie.
Mike was most probably better off answering the question I want to ask, but nitrates from soil or groundwater to get in as a contaminant to a river, what is the time frame, likely time frame of that to happen? Is it 10 years or 20 years? Because I haven't got an issue with the number that's there, but definitely farmers are working in that space to lower their nitrogen levels on their property, yet it's not showing in the water sampling. So, and the phosphate has reduced, so that must be they're using a better mechanism of applicating what they require instead of building capital phosphate in their farms like they used to. That was a practice that we all were taught to have capital reserve of, like it's like a bank, have that reserve in your soil when you need it for a rainy day. So that obviously, that practice is not continuing like it used to in the past. But why is the nitrogen staying there when we, like 10 years ago, we were all using over 200 kilos, basically, for on class 1 and 2 soils. Yet now unless we're putting in maize crop, we're all sticking below that 170 mark. yet we're not lowering nitrogen. Thank you, Mike.
Through you, Chair. So the most recent work we've been looking at for the freshwater policy review has been modelling groundwater and surface water in the Hauraki Plains. So highly
It's
relevant to what
Yeah.
you're asking about. And what we've shown with that modelling is if we reduced the amount of nitrate coming from the land surface by 20% overnight, obviously that's
Yeah, yeah.
not go, but if we did it overnight, it would take 20 years for the full effect of that to be seen in the Piako and Waiho rivers. Some differences between Waiho and Piako, but generally it takes on that order to see the full effect. Some of the benefit you'll see straight away because some of the nitrogen's coming in over land, but much of it is going through through the soil into the shallow
Yeah.
groundwater and then
Back
out.
to aquifer and then out.
Yeah, and then some of the groundwater is quite deep there. So you generally 20 years. So the trouble is that, you know, the monitoring we do shows levels that are bouncing around quite a lot of variation. So we might not pick up those small initial benefits for quite some time. But we have to think about the outcomes for the Firth of Thames, for example, in that case, is we're looking for a longer term beneficial outcome. So just because it's going to take a bit longer because of the groundwater lags doesn't mean we don't start now.
No, and it's most probably, since we're getting those results, what you're saying now is it could take 20 years to get to where we want to. I think it comes down to more application of how we applicate nitrogen, because it's with a tractor spreader most of the time that's flinging stuff out. It doesn't divide from drains or mechanisms to get it to stop actually landing in waterways or where it shouldn't. One reason of that, I actually, most probably a third of my nitrogen I have for the year I spray it on, because I can guarantee where it's put is where it's only on grass and it's not in a drain or on my neighbours or anybody else. My nitrogen lands on my property to grow grass on my property. So I think there is tools in the future to actually reduce that nitrogen point source getting directly into waterways that we have to think better in the future. It's an old technology to be using a granule fertilizer or urea to just spread out willy-nilly and it landing in watercourses and stuff in the future. So I think, but farmers are all trying to get that, you know, I know some guys that are getting down to 120 kilos and quite happy with it. So that over time should actually come right. The biggest thing is the E. coli, how that hasn't removed. I think that's because E. coli is now, that E. coli is happening now. There's a direct source into a waterway somewhere that isn't being maintained. There's some capital asset somewhere, if it's a farm or a municipal thing, that is discharging illegally somehow. And that's a real issue of how, I don't even know if farm plans will sort that out, because is that the guys that are tracking down a farm race and not doing anything about their water running straight off their races, and it goes straight into a waterway. And, you know, farm plans talk about that management of effluent of farm races. So there's a whole lot of contributing things. You know, I've just invested just under $100,000 into a new effluent system so I can get down to like 3 mils of effluent. So I can guarantee no matter what, I'm not going to have runoff in certain times of the year. So
Yeah, but if it's okay, we'll just have a
Yeah.
little chat. So, but what about urine? I mean, you can't just talk about
Yeah.
fertilizer.
No,
You've
no,
got
no.
to talk about the total system and the nitrogen cycle. So you're going to have to think more broadly than just fertilizer application.
I agree with you there again, Bruce. But
Yeah.
to be a Fonterra supply, 100% of your fences drains have to be fenced. So what is going on in that nitrogen then is still taking 20 years to get in the system.
But intensification is still an issue.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. most farms, unless you've got herd homes,
Yeah.
most farms in the hierarchy have de-intensified in the last 5 to 10 years, not intensified. So that's what I'm saying. These numbers, hopefully, I think that we need to have some good, like we do with,
Yeah, well,
Statistics New Zealand.
I want to know the model. I
Yeah.
want to hear about the model at some point, Robbie, because it is about the multiple variables. And the question is, what is the threshold? You say de-intensification has occurred, but has it still come down to a level where you would expect the sort of response? Or are you going to have a legacy of 20, 30 or 40 years before the response comes through? So you need to look at the whole model.
Well, I can I'll explain my situation. We've gone from 550 cows to milking about 390. So if
Which
that's
was
not
different.
deification, I'm basically still doing the same, well, maybe 20,000 milk solids less, but I've got 130 less animals running around at me.
Yeah, but have you monitored the actual
Yes.
nitrogen input on your property and where it ends up in the groundwater? Have you actually got the data?
So guys, to bring the debate to some head.
No,
Well, you
that's
can talk about it
just
at
a
lunchtime.
discussion. That's all it is.
Yeah. So when we were doing PC1, we looked at, they say nitrogen of the dairy farming cows was going to take 80 years to be noticed. They had a whole lot of solutions. Well, they had some solutions that might affect at that time, which Robbie has taken on hand. He's, brought some of his cow numbers down. So I guess there's a couple of questions here is, are farmers still liable for what goes into the ground, Robbie? And is it WRC and your job to look at making sure the data's on par? Because one of the things I remember we had to look at when Erwin was with us, I don't know if he's gone or not, was the different data we were picking up through different areas and how accurate they were. And one of them was stopped because it wasn't accurate enough. So I guess there's a twofold factor for me is how much are farmers doing? How much people helping farmers to do what they need to do? Is the data collecting space that we are talking about feasible for farmers to look at? Because, some of the farms I'm on as a trustee, we have to do a whole lot of measurement stuff, which at the end of the day drives a poor old farmer nutty because they're not quite sure why they're doing it. So I guess to get down to this nitty-gritty, Mike, I'm asking is your data as correct as it can be? Is it a data that gets modified every year on what it is, not what it collects? And how does that feed back to our farmers to help them understand that some of the things they might be doing there are still not relevant to bring it all down? So I guess it's a two-factor thing, is are we helping each other at the end of the day?
I'll just mention, so there's been so much research, particularly around the nitrogen issue. I think we've got a really good understanding, as Bruce mentioned, and Robbie as well, is we understand the nitrogen cycle in farms really well. We understand, the inputs. We understand the effects of, how much feed goes into the animals, how much nitrogen is in that feed, and how much they then urinate out the back end. And that's where most of the nitrogen that ends up in the environment comes from. So, in places like Dairy NZ and central government have invested tens of millions of dollars on nitrogen mitigation research. And I'm involved in a program that Dairy NZ is running where they've identified between 50 and 60% of the nitrogen loss from dairy farms can be mitigated through the application of a range of stacked mitigations, many of which farmers are already putting in place. So we know where the nitrogen is coming from, and we also know that we've got the technology or the answers to address that issue. So one of the things we're doing through our policy and obviously through the farm planning stuff as well is to help give farmers the right incentives and tools to implement those mitigations. And if we have that adopted at scale, we will see resulting reductions in nitrogen loading in our monitoring systems. So I'm confident that we will be able to see that. It's about the farmers, taking up those technologies and mitigation methods. And obviously what we do in policy, whether it's through consenting activities or voluntary activities, that's really the crux of the change that we need to drive.
Ka pai tēnā, Robbie? You finished? Bruce? No, I mean,
I'm just saying, yeah, we just got to keep talking, and I
Then,
really
right.
want to see, I want to see the models, and I want to see, and when you talk about the mitigations, because it's the uptake of the mitigations, they haven't. Some farmers are doing a great job, Robbie. I'm the first to concede that. But the question is, at a landscape scale, what does the model look
Yeah.
like at a landscape scale, which would lead to the sort of shift that we want?
I totally agree with you saying, Bruce. And the frustrating thing is you go for a walk down your farm or other people's properties and you go, geez, the water quality that's so much better than it was 20 years ago. I can see the bottom of the drain, but it doesn't show up in the numbers.
yeah. So I guess, what I'm saying is that mitigation is showing some good stuff because humans, they understand the naughty things that they do, but they also like to see what they are doing well is appreciated, because at the end of the day, we've taken farmers from my grandparents' day to just do whatever they like to 2025, and the changes has been quite immaculate. But no matter where a poor farmer goes, and I don't know why I'm picking on farmers, is that there are still people out there who still think they're the biggest reason why this is not happening. But when you look at the bloody marine park down at the coastline with all those boats out there and all the oil that's burning in the water, nobody moans. So I said, all I'm trying to say is that thank you. Thank you for your report. And I do look forward to what a summary of mitigation might look like for people like us who go to our constituencies and talk about the state of the environment, and instead of giving them all a gloom, go, but you can fix this, by only having one child a year or something, so you don't increase the population, I don't know, and making sure that the data that we're asking for, and Bruce is on par with that, would be great, And so if I see we've got a piece we've added in number 2 to the recommendations, and it's about that it recommends the council to report presented for council. So
Yeah, but-
before I go to you guys, are we looking at the total full or a summary of, or?
So the way I've written it is that it would minimise the work for staff to simply present the paper we've already had to full council. But I was thinking actually it would be quite good for councillors to have a bit more conversation rather than what we do in a formal council meeting. So hence I've added following a workshop to understand the key issues for the Waikato. And then the paper coming to council could include some options. Perhaps that's come out of what you've heard in the workshop of where we want to narrow in, because there's a lot of points in here. And I thought I realize some will think that it's quite late in the training for that kind of thing, but I actually counter that with
Simple.
it's really important for existing councillors who are coming back next training to start their thinking of what we're interested in to flow into the next strategic direction. And obviously it's open to the public so that should new candidates come along, they can also look at this to feed into their thinking. Because when we get to the new training, it's all just drinking from a fire hose of information, and the strategic direction happens really fast. So this just gives that time to allow this council to have a bit of a chat, the staff to hear from where we're at the moment, and then for people's thinking to flow into the future. That's all. And I think it's a balance of an extra workshop, which you know, we've done for other topics that people wanted to discuss further recently, to then lead into something, depending on what comes out of the workshop. We can get quite focused when it comes to
Yeah, 'cause
council,
I think
hopefully with the
workshop needs to be a
options.
bit-
Yeah.
Robbie?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there. Like, I just want to put it into perspective of dairy farming that, you know, well, on my side, it's all a permitted activity. It won't be in the PC1, I imagine, but maybe there needs to be a talk about if you go over a certain stocking rate on a certain land size, it needs to be assessed what are the mitigating factors to being operating that on that sort of land type. If you're a winter milk supplier for Fonterra, you get 2 shed inspections a year, not 1, because to make sure that your farmer's compliant with winter milk standards, not just normal spring standard. So there is some things that maybe we can better approach intensification of how it's managed than just, you know, I'm getting to that point. I most probably jumped too far, but I think those are the sort of things in the future that we've got to start really assessing.
We could discuss in the workshop whether things are policy and
That's
stick
right.
or whether they're carrot.
And I don't want to overemphasize the one thing, water quality, because this report
Yes.
is way, way broader
Yeah,
than that. And,
It
and
is.
again, you know, there are a whole range of things. And the question is, which are the bits that the regional council has the responsibility for and should be focusing on? Because a lot of the things in that report are actually not our responsibility. They are under different bits of legislation, and other agencies and institutions have a bigger role than we do.
Yeah.
But I'm speaking on behalf of my constituents.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that is that intensification
Yep.
dairy zone, that if they want longevity of their businesses, it needs to be correctly operated.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying, yeah.
I'd actually quite like there to be
Okay.
quite a focus on the urban, not always the rural.
On the
Pointing
whole.
that out. Yeah, on the
Waikato
whole, and the
Regional Council,
holistic
on the
point,
whole.
as Bruce
Yeah, yeah.
mentions.
Yep.
And yeah, I'd actually be really interested to see what the councillors want to focus on, rather than always worrying whether central government mandate and legislative this or that.
Yeah,
Like the great work that Valerie's done in the waste space
That's
has
another
come
thing.
about
PC1.
because of
Mm.
desires of governors who originally established that role, for example. So
So this is unfortunately, Guy, I think we're taking it a little bit further. So let me get this straight. This reading this is that the EPC recommends to council the report be presented to full council following. So it's that following. I'm not understanding the agenda. Are you saying we should have a workshop
workshop
first?
yeah, to
Okay.
really understand
It would
and
be, I
narrow
would have, I
down,
would have done it.
and then the
pretty
paper can
differently.
come from that.
Okay,
depending
well,
on what
as long as
councillors
we
say.
understand it, and then
Yeah.
between myself, Brent and Bruce, we'll look at what that workshop is,
Appreciate
because, so guys, we're gonna just have a conversation after you go from the table. So thank you for your report. No doubt, we're gonna give you some more work by the sounds of it. We'll make sure Brent is up on par with you guys and about what we decide to take to the.
Mike,
council.
just before
Okay.
you leave, does the government produce a response to this? A response, because what I'm hearing our councillors saying today is, what is our response? What is how is that going to lead into our strategic priorities for the next triennium as a response to this? Is there a government response to this report?
The short answer is no.
No.
No, because they.
Leave it
the
at that,
normal- the
otherwise we
normal-
could go on
The
and
normal
on.
model is based on DIPSA, which includes responses, but central government MFE doesn't do that.
Yeah,
They
yeah, yeah.
leave out the response. Yeah.
So we'll be in touch between us and you around what this might look like going into the council. So thank you, guys. Yeah, so thank you. Mm. Oh, okay, so you are doing the next paper, or are you with Matilda? So this is the recreational monitoring data from summer. So this is, so to get myself correct on this piece of paper, so it's just about exactly that, the monitoring data, yeah. And this is from all of the regional council areas or just some particular spaces? Okay, okay. So welcome to the table. You have a, do you have a slideshow? Oh, you can take it as read, and any questions? Well, you know, some of the data in here is so, yeah.
I just wonder whether or not it might be helpful to just go through what you'd see as
Yeah,
the
give me a
key
summary.
points that you'd like to bring to the attention of the committee from the report.
Before Mafalda, so we'll just mention that this measure of swimmability is one of the KPIs in our long-term plan,
Oh, yeah.
and it's subject to the New Zealand audit at the moment of our long-term plan. So this is one that Audit New Zealand specifically wanted to look at how we're delivering around this this area. This obviously where people can swim is a significant national issue. So just wanted to highlight that as something that is we've had to have extra attention on in the last. Few months.
So once again, my question would be, is that you got the monitoring, you monitor some places, you've said in here some are not good, but so what? I mean, so what? What have you done to advise the public not to swim there? Because you know what public are like. They'll do whatever they like it when signs are there. Don't do this because then they'll do it. So you know, so what I'm asking is, what are we doing, or what do we do to litigate our people or the people going into areas to swim? Also to collect kai anyway, you know, because they will do that. So if you do what Brent said, let's summarize what you've done, and then maybe you can ask some of our questions about what are we doing to litigate people going into those areas.
Very good. Just a summary of the results for this season. We have generally really good results in open coasts and also in estuaries, in the Waikato River and in Lake Taupo. Other regional rivers and other regional lakes are not so good. When we come to the long-term grades, which is a reflection of the last 5 years of monitoring, we don't have such great results for all these areas. The open coast beaches and Lake Taupo continue to be really good water quality for swimming, but in general, the Waikato River, other regional rivers, other regional lakes are not trending so well over the 5-year period. We do understand that we talk about recreation, but some of these places are mostly used for swimming. Some others are mostly used for other activities like boating or just wheeling around the water courses. So we think that's important to highlight in our approach to reach out to the public. In places such as Lake Taupo or the Waikato River hydro lakes, where we know that people are really going to swim, we have mostly indications when we have excesses of bacteria. In this case, we monitor E. coli, or when we have excesses of cyanobacteria, which are the blue-green algae that cause blooms in some parts of the river. We complement those signs that we put next to the swimming places with the information that we display on LAWA for the public to track down the weekly results. And every week we send out an email to stakeholders, iwi, communities, the district health boards, to inform of the results that we got. And in this season, for example, the District Health Board has acted on the cyanobacteria exceedances by issuing public health warnings for 2 lakes in our region. So we try to be preemptive on the signs that we display on each of these sites. We try to inform people that they should use their judgment when they look at the water, but we also try to provide the most up-to-date information, which is typically weekly for people that are online on LAWA.
So do we do our peak lakes? I mean, Naroto Lake has a lot of boating on top of it, you know. I think I've seen people fall in it. So do we do that lake?
We do during the summer, we analyze Naruto every week for E. coli and cyanobacteria.
Yeah.
Cyanobacteria has been the biggest issue in there,
Yeah.
particularly for the boating, for the sailing club.
Mm.
Yeah, and this year it's been particularly concerning with the levels of cyanobacteria being really high.
Okay. So this is not even a probably you probably look me up and down with a dumb question, but because we've got these bad things we're finding in our waterways, like the clams, the all other stuff, how do they impact on the water quality of areas? Because, for instance, why on earth they even looked at where they looked at when they went to when they first found them, is that's a more boating area than a swimming area, So I just wondered how much impact those have as well on the quality of the river or the waterway.
It's very much interlinked. We sometimes cannot disentangle those effects. We tend to look at the system as a holistic system. We know it's difficult to separate these variables and to see how they are trending individually. But in general, we could say that, for example, for cyanobacteria, we know that they are very much associated with the input of nutrients in the water. So we tend to follow that reasoning when we try to establish what might be the main environmental drivers that are causing the water to have the quality that we see.
Okay. Any other questions? Bruce? Bobby?
Yeah, it's just related to the water testing from the last
Absolutely.
paper. So the two are one, it's one of the same thing. Till we get some point source discharges sorted out, it's going to
Mm. Bruce, all good? Well, that was short. I know, it's all connected. Yeah. Well, thank you, Korua, for your report. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Okay. So what before we close down, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about, and as you know, the PC one, when you listen to some of the questions, does the council actually know what PC1 is? Should we consider looking at maybe a very short workshop around re-enlightening our people around the table what it's all about? Because I think the biggest fault of our council is they've looked at how long it's been going for and the dollar impact. They're not looking at the impact of the long run on why it started. The other one I was looking at is how do we take the waste action plan and waste products, how do we take that particular corridor also to the big council? So do we consider when we do the environmental state of environment as a workshop, should we consider adding those other two into that type of workshop, or do you think that's too long, or Bruce? Because, every time PC1 comes up, the first thing everybody talks about is the dollar value more than the actual work is going to be good at.
Yeah. Well, I think
Just
the point,
some
the
questions
point about
before I close
PC1, the point about PC1 and all of the national policy statements on freshwater and all of them were all designed to partly fix some of those drivers.
Yeah.
And so it may just be something that can be covered off in that, because I think it's probably a bit late now to have a separate workshop on PC.
Yeah, I don't want to have a separate.
I mean, if people haven't sorted that out by now.
They're never going to, and we've got a new triennium next year, and so just food for thought before we close down, because I know how important the three of them were. This one here? You got that. You've got the waste one as well. You know, should there be elements of all of those in that one-off workshop?
I think when I talk with the team about the purpose of the workshop, what I think I'm hearing is you want all of the councillors to see the precious state the environment is under, which these reports are reflecting. But what you're also keen to hear is what are the things that this council is currently doing in response to that, because as you say, Councillor, it's not like this has suddenly just turned up today. So there are responses that are happening around the council. You're going to have one of those responses this afternoon, which is the water security strategy. You've got a particular strategy around Whangamarino. So, but I think what you're looking to bring to the light of the whole council is this is the basis for all of these responses, and then we'll give the council an opportunity to have a think about the next triennium. Are there some areas in here that they think is a real focus for having knowledge about? Because I'm not sure whether or not if there's a council with a different makeup, whether or not you're keen on this information being in front of a new council early in its triennium, so it fully sees that full picture.
It's food for thought, eh? I mean, we got 3 take at the table that are all important, and they all, like Bruce and them say, that it all ends up relating to the state of the environment. You know, so you can't take one to the table without trying to incorporate little bits of all of it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is at the end of the day, it's about the state of the environment, but some of the factors that actually are drivers within that sort of thing. You know,
I sort of see these other reports as being appendices to the main report that people should be focused on, which was that state of the environment summary based on the government's, recent domains reports, all amalgamated together. And because you don't want to overload them with too many bits of paper before they go into the room. But, having said that, I think Brett summed it up there. It's about, what, as a response, what are we trying to tell future councillors about where the focus should be? What are the things that we need to do to respond to what we heard from what was a very depressing report?
Yeah, that's what I said. We should have it at the beginning. So, sorry, Jen, we were just talking about, let me finish this off. I'm sorry, I thought we had done it. Can we have a mover and a seconder for the recreation monitoring data? Yeah.
No, she can't.
She can't. Yeah, she's not a member. Yeah. Okay, so we were just talking about what's a good idea to take to the council, Jen. A little bit and pieces. The state of the environment, we'll tick that box. But the waste that we had in the PC1, how do we incorporate that? Because Bruce, we're all saying that they are factors of the state of the environment, and we don't want to overload our councillors with a whole lot of corridor, but the state of environment is important. But adding maybe pieces of the PC1, because I don't know whether everybody understands what that means, and pieces of the waste in an appendice to do that, so that the workshop is about some of the drivers that gives us bad report for the environment, state of environment. So that's what we're just talking about. Sorry, Robbie.
Yeah, I hope we're still talking all in the same space.
We're still talking about.
What I understand is the government's going to give us a national bottom line standard that we're going to have to, that's going to be implemented nationally, and then it'll be up to us around the table of what
that means. We
want specifically target in our catchments. So I think a workshop to understanding the total pressures, where we've got to, and as Bruce has said, understand if the data collected for doesn't matter for that catchment says this, what are we going to do to mitigate that in 20 years' time we're getting to the numbers that we want to get to? Because if that's how long it's going to take to get some of those things there, we just gave the processes in place. And like, if you're working it out at the moment, it's been about 5-8 years since some of this stuff's been implemented on farms, I suppose. So it's most probably only 3 or 4 years away, and those numbers should start dropping. If it hasn't, then we've got some real serious issues because the science isn't showing the facts. At the moment, what they're saying is the science is going to show in the future that some of these numbers are going to drop. Hopefully that is. I wish it anyway. But I think we've got to just sit around the table and discuss what are the mitigating factors, or we're governors, sorry. So where do we want them? Staff will have to go back and say, well, this is the only way this is the director to get to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But the whole
I
idea.
shouldn't say mitigating factors, but
No.
where we think
Yes.
we'd like the limits to get to within reason, and what is going to have to be done to get it to that point.
So the whole idea of taking the state of environment to the whole council, though, is to advise them of what is happening out there.
Yeah.
Because it's stuck in our committee and there's no way I'm going to go. And so while we're doing that, though, wouldn't it be a good idea to ensure they understand these other little bits? Because the drivers that are in there are exactly what we can be looking at more than anything else.
Well, it has to go to whole of council to change policy. Doesn't it?
Yeah, but
Well, no,
Sure,
it's
we
it's
can-
about
we can-
highlighting them. It's about that. I'm talking only about the workshop. I'm
Yeah.
not talking about what we end up taking to the council.
Yeah.
So we don't want to have a workshop and find that at the end of the day, that was such a waste of time because they weren't interested. We have to make them understand that the state of the environment just does not belong to EPC. It belongs to the council. Exactly. It belongs to Waikato Regional Council. That was a devastating bloody report. But what I found sad was there's no mitigation in that whatsoever.
response.
You know, so the workshop,
That's what I'd like to
hopefully
get
with
to.
those two guys will be, you know, so all I'm trying to get at is what is our workshop about? Because what
Yeah.
I don't want to do is do all of this again and take it all up exactly
Yeah.
the same. So we have to really work very wisely on what a workshop is
Yeah.
before we actually take that paper to the board.
I think our
Absolutely.
our staff know a
there's no
lot
hurry.
about what we can and can't do at regional council level. That's where their guidance is really useful in a workshop. But I'd like to see it also come out of so the regional councils understand not just that we are doing something in that space, but what might be required to adequately address that space so that they can calibrate their ambitions as well. Because a lot of the time when we report it is, yep, we're doing something towards it. And that's always been scoped relative to the rates we'd set but if you want the numbers to change, what's the thing that we could do? And sometimes it is as simple as get a summer student to start researching that so we have data next year. Sometimes it's a lot more than that. And one of the options is policy, but we all know policy is super expensive and takes forever, it feels like. And so that's why I kept reiterating with Valerie's work, you know, it's proactive, supportive, enabling the TAs to work with us, that kind of space, or enabling landowners to work with us, or
Yeah.
that
And
carrot space.
I don't want to take a report to the full council with just a report like today. So we will work on
Yeah.
what the workshop looks like. We will make it quite strategically understandable so we know what we're talking about. And then when we do go up to the full council, this particular committee itself as well as they will understand what we've been trying to. All we're doing is highlighting WRC that we as WRC have missed some of the most important things we're doing.
Yeah. And there might be some districts where certain topics are really topical. So if you highlight that to the councillors, they can choose whether they want to push for that or not in future.
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
microplastics in certain streams in Hamilton. Who knew? So
Well, thank you,
Carol?
guys. That's our day. We're close with a karakia. Do we have any food? Oh, yeah, we have some food, so that's good. What time's the next hui? Oh, you got heaps of time. So, yeah, so we're going to close with a karakia. Off you go, Brent. You love us.
Unahia mai tu te tapanui. Kia wātia kia māma. Te nākau te tinana te hininaro. E te ara takatū. Ko e rāhi rongo. E whakāria aki ki runga. Kia tīna. Dean, Haumie Huie Tai.
Thank you.